Welcome, everyone. My name is Eric Davis. I am the Technology Investment Analyst here at Automation Alley. And the presentation I'm going to show you today is just not only just some simple solutions that you can figure out and how to implement Industry 4.0 for your budget, but also what is the path to getting to that point? How do you make those decisions? And so when we first step into this, I want to talk about something a little bit different than maybe just Industry 4.0 in general, but the 4 Ds of digital disruption. This is what we call. And these are essentially, what are the ways Industry 4.0 can and potentially will disrupt your business model? So the first one's called disintermediation. That's talking about basically getting rid of the middleman. So if Industry 4.0 is allowing connections between people, if the person in the middle is not providing value, either they're a reseller or maybe there's some sort of design capabilities, they need to provide some value. And Industry 4.0 is breaking down those connections. The next piece is dematerialization. So think of materials getting smaller or moving to digital assets. Again, same thing, engineering designs going from paper, moving over to digital, being able to send anywhere in the world. The next piece is demonetization, not as big in Industry 4.0. However, it still is kind of relevant. It's basically talking about essentially attention is what companies are going after, not necessarily just the money. So think of Facebook grabbing your attention. For a manufacturer, this indirectly helps you because you want to have the attention of your customers and your suppliers. Maybe it's to provide them education on 3D printing. That's actually something we've seen from manufacturers talking about. Some of their customers don't know how to design for 3D. So getting their attention, educating them indirectly leads to that revenue source. And then finally, democratization. Hard drives are getting smaller, technology is getting cheaper, access to technology is getting more and more. So smaller companies are able to do more powerful things. And so with these opportunities that we're seeing, what's stopping Michigan manufacturers? And so in 2021 or last year, Automation Alley, along with Lawrence Tech Centropolis, we went through an Industry 4.0 asset map. We basically went around the state and said, what is holding back manufacturers, along with other questions. But the 3 main themes that became clear were companies were not aware of the technologies that are available today. They don't have the culture to support implementing those technologies, and the return on investment isn't as good as what they thought it was. And so my goal is hopefully by the end of this presentation, we can kind of connect the dots on how all three are aligned. And maybe there's ways we can break down some of those barriers and hopefully help you figure out how we can build up that awareness, tackle the culture, and you can start seeing how do you go attack that return on investment. So I'll bring it back to Industry 3.0. We've seen this before, and I'll use the example. I pulled this from Kawasaki Robotics. And so this is one of their first machines. This was built back in 1969. And so you can think there is a market need back in 1969. They're saying, we need to build these robots. We need to figure out how do we get machines that can do multiple purposes instead of just a dedicated machine for dedicated tasks. And so what ended up spurring that interest was a labor shortage. And I think you can, see the parallel between today. And then about 4 years later, there was an oil crisis that slowed down investments. But then in about 1979, there was another oil crisis. Now, along the way, there had been progress in that technology, and also companies had been following robotics. And adoption in 1980, when the return on investment was a little bit more palpable, it adopted significantly, but only for those who are ready to take on that disruption. And that's the key point I want to make here, is it took 10 years for this technology to become from adolescence to fruition. But it, we got to make sure that we're keeping track of those technologies along the way, because if you're just learning about 1980, that could have been the issue. So coming from that point, how do we actually tackle making these Industry 4.0 investment decisions? So the first strategy we go about is actually pretty common. We use what's called a defensive investment strategy. So think about a large upfront investment or a moderate investment, and there's a lot of decisions along the way, and finally you implement and put that equipment in place. Typically, you know how much you're getting back for that equipment. You can do some sort of payback calculation or some sort of discounted cash flow or net present value. Now, the one that's not necessarily known to manufacturers or others is an offensive investment strategy. So this is kind of built on like an option-like model or option-like bets. Essentially, instead of making one big investment, we make multiple small investments without knowing what the ROI is. So these are decisions we make in technologies when we know we need to go in that direction, but we're not sure what the payoff's going to be or when. We just having a hunch that it's going to work. So we have to take little bets along the way. So how do you make sure you do that in your business without screwing it up? So the two different ways you go about doing it is look at what's mission critical. If it's mission critical, we can't use an offensive investment strategy. We have to use a defensive. That means, anything that can't be touched, it's got to be shut down. Very, very critical. It can't be messed around with. Those are the types of things we want to do a defensive investment strategy. And typically defensive investment strategies are for technologies to sustain in the long term. They may create a local competitive advantage, but they're definitely for something in the long term, just to keep you up with the industry standard. So again, not offensive, just kind of holding your ground and making sure you're going to last for long term. The ROI payout in time and dollars can be estimated, like I said before, and it's moderate to large investments. Now, for an offensive investment strategy, think about more flexible systems. This could be your back office. This could be part of your production that's not as rigorous. So you can take some chances in there without screwing things up because there's some manual pieces that you can kind of come in halfway through and fix. This is more so for cutting edge technology to create a long-term competitive advantage. So you're taking a bet that one of these technologies is going to pan out and it's going to be part of your, what makes your brand strong in the future. And as opposed to return on investment, learning on investment is kind of what the point is. So each stop along the way, you're having some point of learning. And even though that may seem like wasted resources and time, that helps you get to that ROI. And it helps you understand other technologies along the way. And the more you dive into Industry 4.0, the more you'll see all of these technologies are intertwined. And again, tiny to small investments. Now, the big thing I'll say here is no matter what, both strategies have to be in line with short and long-term goals. So if you're making technology decisions without keeping in mind what are the long-term goals of the company, such as growing revenue, reducing costs, you got to make sure that's all in line or else these strategies will not work. And so how do we improve alignment? So two different types of organizations we've come across in our Industry 4.0 assessments that I do. One is called a reactive organization. So think of an organization, when a crisis occurs, it causes immediate pain, they take quick action. However, they didn't see it coming. So there's a little bit of error proneness to the methodology because there's not enough time to vet the solution. So sometimes issues get resolved that are either preventable, maybe they actually weren't that important, they weren't urgent, so there was a mismatch in priority, or it's a combination of all three. And what this does is it loses focus for the organization and it makes it harder to implement Industry 4.0. For a learning organization, we take a step out to make sure that we're doing tasks that not only improve today's outcomes, but also future outcomes. How do we build scale with each task that we do? How do we mitigate major mistakes in the future and also their downside risks? So we take a step back and we look to see what is going on. And maybe there's a potential downside in the long term, but we're taking a path that can mitigate that. And then issues are properly prioritized and resolved, leading to a more focused organization. The big takeaway here is a learning organization, they generate more ROI on Industry 4.0 than a reactive organization. So I'll ask you, are you a learning organization ready to take on digital disruption? So in our corporate governance system, IQ, we go through some of these concepts. And so we talk about companies on a spectrum. They can either be arrogant or confident, and they'll fall somewhere in the middle, right? And in those organizations, there are good outcomes and there are bad outcomes. In an arrogant organization, it's driven by comparison. So I'm better than you, we're better than them. We got to do that because they're doing that. Confidence is more about improvement. How do we build production by 5%? How do we grow sales by 10%? Those are the things we're looking for. How do we increase our lead time when we're making sales so it puts less pressure on operations? Those are the types of things we want to build. In an arrogant organization, is driven by ego. I'm the one taking this on and I'm doing it. Confidence is more self-belief. I am leading the task, but I'm playing with other people to make sure we're doing collaboration properly. Legend, talking about the way we used to do things and how great it was back in the day. You need to do it like this. Confident organizations deal in objectivity, data. They use those data points to make their decisions. And so in an arrogant organization, there's reaction, there's attribution to some person instead of the process, and there's retribution. There's some sort of action taking place, whether it's a firing, discipline, something like that, but it doesn't address the underlying issue. Now, when there's a desirable outcome, there can be chances for delusion, hubris, and ultimately risk, because good things are happening, but you're not looking at the underlying reasons for that. It may just be the market's doing well and you're getting and things are just going well for you. But in the long term, there could be a lot of risk to that. So for confident organizations, you're responding to issues, you're learning from them, you're recalibrating. And then when desirable outcomes come, you're still learning, you're still recalibrating, and ultimately you're growing. So you're taking every opportunity to grow your organization. So hopefully, when you look at this, maybe you can kind of see where you fall on the spectrum here. So what are some good examples of confident organizations or some good Industry 4.0 examples? So this first one came from our Project Diamond. This is called Air and Liquid Systems, and they were awarded a 3D printer through our Project Diamond that was funded by the CARES grant through Oakland and Macomb County. And what they essentially were able to do is they learned how to 3D print on the job, right? They had no experience in 3D printing prior to this. And they just started with simple things. Hey, let's just do the logo on the side of our machine, see how that looks. Aesthetically, it looked better. It was cheaper to produce, and it was a fun design activity. And they learned a lot along the way. And so as they took steps along the way, they ended up building this part, and now they're seeing cost savings. And this is, from last year. So I'm sure they've gotten even more parts that they've been able to reduce cost on. The next piece is an implementation between Unit X. They're part of our Industry 4.0 Accelerator program, and Melling. Now there's a video associated with it. It's attached to the PowerPoint. You can watch that later, but just for the sake of time, I'll just keep moving on. But essentially, Unit X and Melling work together. Melling had an issue with inspection of parts, and they were relying on their humans too much. It was kind of backbreaking. They wanted them to do something else. And so Unit X has this vision inspection system that was able to reduce a lot of errors and increase their efficiency, and at a relatively low cost for what they're getting. They put about over $30,000, over $40,000 in this equipment, but it ended up what they are allowed to do is move 2 of their workers from inspection over to something else that was much more value added. So it was a big gain for them in terms of efficiency. Another one is a CNC machine shop. So this is someone we've worked with at Automation Alley doing data analysis. Not necessarily Industry 4.0, but it is a good example of a precursor to it. Project Diamond Company. So they have approximately 5 to 10 million overall revenue. One of the things they do, which is, again, isn't Industry 4.0, but it leads into those implementations, maybe using AI or something like that. They routinely run reports from their cloud, from their systems to learn about their business. And one of them is a quoting report. They actually ran one report, one of the reports they regularly run. They found a customer quoted $100 million and didn't execute a single order. And so what they did is they called up that customer, had an honest conversation, said, hey, you can't do this anymore. And it led to a $1.8 million order. The whole point is, even though this may not be a Industry 4.0 concept, CRMs and ERP systems, CRMs have been around for a long time. However, making data-driven decisions, that is what a learning organization does. The more data you can pull out of your system and the more time you can take to dedicate for that analysis, that will make those decisions better. And also, if over time you find that it's taking too long to do the manual process, that may be the time to say, hey, let's bring in some computers and AI, and maybe there's some small portion of it we can automate, similar to what we did with the assessment program. The last budget-friendly one was an on-premise system hack. So in some of the research that we've done, some companies have said, they feel much more comfortable keeping their systems on-premise instead of having it on cloud. In this case, it's an automotive part wholesaler. They had cloud storage. It's less secure than on-premise storage. So they felt they were more secure, even though they had on-premise IT hardware and a dedicated IT person. However, they didn't have the backup set up properly, and they didn't have proper routine maintenance. So for example, they had all of their hard drives connected to the network. So when it got hit with ransomware, they didn't have a separate hard drive that was being backed up that wasn't connected to the network. So every single hard drive got wiped out. This happened twice, both times resulting in massive data loss. Now their reaction was to move their software to a local hosted system. And so you can move your stuff to the cloud with a local provider at a relatively low cost. Now, in this case, this was a reactionary moment. We don't want to be in this place. We want to do this before we get hacked. We want to make sure that we're taking the right steps. And so, they learn their lesson at a high price, essentially. So how do learning organizations adopt Industry 4.0? Here's some common characteristics that we've seen in our assessment and leadership and evaluation data. So there's a clear alignment between the goals and technology decisions. There is a corporate strategy that's shared and executed at all levels of the organization. So when we ask employees, what are the goals? How do you go about doing things? The answers from the bottom of the organization are pretty similar to the top of the organization. If they're saying, I don't know, or what's this all about, that's an issue. Strong business culture exists because the mission, the vision, the core values are all matched by good day-to-day execution. So in iCube, we have this concept called inspiration. That's like the mission, the vision, core values, and that sets the strategy of the organization, which is the intelligence, and the intelligence guides the intensity, which is day-to-day execution. But you don't believe in the mission, vision, and core values unless there's good execution coming on. Otherwise, it's just words on the wall. So those two have to be in sync. The other thing I saw was the size and type of company didn't ensure success. However, it can amplify success and diminish weaknesses. So the ability to have resources and budget and throw people at the problems does allow for companies in the short term to adopt Industry 4.0 better, but not necessarily in the long term. It's more so about those first 3 bullet points. And for those just starting out, do something small and fun to make it learning easier. So 3D printing logos, like I talked about before. Actually, here at Automation Alley, we were doing Industry 4.0 challenges just because a lot of us on the team were new to that concept. This is 2-3 years ago. So we started doing them, and it was a lot of fun, and we learned a ton. We actually got to help some customers along the way too. So there's always an opportunity for that. Another example is allow experimentation at all levels. So a good example is this is 3M. So they have what's called the 15% rule, and they've been doing this for quite a while. And essentially they allow their employees 15% of time for innovation. Now, you may not be able to give up 15%, but maybe you give up 5%. And basically allow your employee to do whatever they want as long as it's in line with the company. And there's a lot of great products that have come out from this. In fact, one of the materials for their sandpaper came out of this. A guy originally invented the sandpaper. He brought it to the showcase. It didn't work. He still spent time tinkering with it. Ended up coming back years later, and 3M, helped him patent it, and now it's in the shelves. So how can we help? So there's a few ways we can help build that awareness, help you understand the return on investment, and kind of help break down those issues with culture. So get your essential membership to build awareness and learn about the programs we're involved in. If you're a manufacturer in Macomb or Oakland County, you can email support@projectdiamond.org to get connected in that network and start getting along the journey with us to possibly take some of those option-like bets. If you're not a manufacturer in Oakland, Macomb County, that's fine. You can stay tuned to Project Diamond. And then finally, on May 10th is our Integrate Conference. We're going to go over some great concepts involving innovation, sustainability, and connected Industry 4.0 technologies. And you're going to hear from manufacturers, tech providers, people who play around in the ecosystem. Everyone will be there. So last time we had a couple years ago, we had over 1,000 people. So we're hoping for a good attendance this year too. And so for the last thing I'll list here is, if there's nothing you take away from this, understand that being a learning organization is key. So if you have some time later on, either yourself with your team, just kind of sit down and say, what are all the ways we are a learning organization, and what are all the ways we aren't an learning organization? And maybe what you'll find out of that is maybe you'll find some roadblocks to your Industry 4.0 adoption roadmap. And maybe, you never know, you might end up adopting a technology that can be really useful and impactful in the long term.